As evening fell, the heavy air blanketed the narrow streets of the small town. A criminal ran in disarray, trying to make his way through the unfamiliar corners. From his clothes, hidden documents slipped onto the ground, exposing more than he could bear. Out of nowhere, the dry sound of hooves echoed, and a black police horse emerged, guided with rigor. The crowd approached in silence, witnessing the scene like an improvised spectacle. The fugitive tried to advance, but was blocked by the imposing form of the animal. In the center of the square, surrounded by stairs and papers in the wind, he shouted, "Save me from this police horse!" For a second, everything stopped. Do you love stories with animals? Then subscribe now and don't miss a single one. Thank you for following us. Now back to our story. The late afternoon cast long shadows across Millbrook's quiet streets, where the rhythm of small-town life had remained unchanged for decades. Children's bicycles lined the sidewalks, porch swings creaked gently in the evening breeze, and the familiar sounds of dinner preparations drifted through open windows. It was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, where secrets were hard to keep, and where the most excitement usually came from the annual county fair. But today, that peaceful routine shattered like glass hitting concrete. The sound of running footsteps echoed off the brick buildings lining Main Street, urgent and desperate. Jackson Morrison's breath came in ragged gasps as he rounded the corner by Peterson's hardware store, his work shirt damp with sweat and his eyes darting frantically from side to side. For a man in his early 40s, Jack had always prided himself on staying in shape, but panic had a way of draining strength faster than any physical exertion. Behind him, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats grew louder. Jack had been running for what felt like hours, though his watch showed barely 20 minutes had passed since he'd bolted from the town hall. 20 minutes that felt like a lifetime, 20 minutes that had transformed him from a respected member of the community into something he'd never thought he'd become. A man with something to hide. The irony wasn't lost on him. For 3 years, he'd worked as Millbrook's municipal auditor, the man responsible for keeping the town's finances transparent and honest. He'd built his reputation on integrity, on asking the hard questions that others preferred to avoid. His neighbors trusted him, his colleagues respected him, and his ex-wife Sarah had always said his stubborn honesty was both his greatest strength and his most infuriating weakness. Now that same honesty threatened to destroy everything. The manila envelope tucked inside his jacket, pressed against his ribs with every step, a constant reminder of what he'd discovered in the depths of the town's financial records. Documents that should never have existed, transactions that painted a picture so ugly he'd stared at them for an hour before accepting what they meant. Numbers don't lie, his accounting professor had always said, and these numbers told a story of corruption that reached into the highest levels of Millbrook's government. Jack's foot caught on an uneven sidewalk stone, sending him stumbling toward Mrs. Henderson's pristine rose garden. He caught himself just in time, thorns scratching his palm as he pushed off the fence. Behind him, the hoofbeats maintained their steady pace, neither gaining nor falling back, like a heartbeat that refused to stop. He risked a glance over his shoulder and saw them. Officer Sarah Chen astride Thunder, the police department's black stallion. Even from a distance, Jack could see the determination in Sarah's posture, the way she moved with her mount as if they were one creature. Thunder's coat gleamed like polished obsidian in the afternoon sun, his powerful muscles bunching and releasing. With each stride, the horse's nostrils flared slightly, but his breathing remained controlled, professional, as if this was just another day at the office. For Thunder, perhaps it was. The 8-year-old stallion had been with the Millbrook Police Department for 5 years, ever since the town council had approved the mounted patrol program. Chief Martinez had called it an investment in community policing, a way to connect with residents and handle situations where a patrol car might be too aggressive or impersonal. Thunder had proven his worth dozens of times over, helping with crowd control at festivals, searching wooded areas for lost hikers, and yes, pursuing suspects who thought they could outrun justice on foot. But this wasn't some drunk college kid stumbling home from a party or a teenager who'd been caught vandalizing property. This was Jack Morrison, the man who'd coached Thunder's rider through her divorce 2 years ago, who'd helped her navigate the complex emotions of starting over at 35 in a town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Sarah Chen had arrived in Millbrook straight from the police academy in the state capital, drawn by the promise of small-town policing where she could make a real difference. She'd grown up in cities where police were often viewed with suspicion, where the job meant dealing with violence and desperation on a daily basis. Millbrook had offered something different, a chance to be part of the community rather than just its guardian. The mounted patrol had been her idea, actually. She'd grown up around horses on her grandmother's farm in Montana, and she'd convinced Chief Martinez that a horse could go places a patrol car couldn't, could diffuse tensions in ways that sirens and flashing lights never could. Thunder had been a rescue from a racing stable that had gone out of business, a horse with speed and intelligence but no direction until he'd found his calling in police work. Now, as Thunder's hooves struck the pavement in measured beats, Sarah found herself in the strangest chase of her career. She'd received the call 25 minutes ago. Jackson Morrison had fled the town hall, and dispatch had reports of him running toward the residential district. The details had been vague, something about an investigation and documents, but the urgency in Chief Martinez's voice had been unmistakable. "Bring him in safely, Chen," the chief had said. "Whatever's going on, we need to talk to him before this gets out of hand." Before what got out of hand, Sarah had wondered, but there hadn't been time for questions. She'd saddled Thunder with practiced efficiency and set off toward the reported sighting near the old Methodist church. Finding Jack hadn't been difficult. A man in business attire running through residential neighborhoods tended to attract attention, especially when that man was known to most of the people watching him flee. As they rounded another corner, Sarah noticed the growing number of spectators. Mrs. Patterson stood on her porch with a cordless phone pressed to her ear, probably calling her sister to report the excitement. 3 teenagers on bicycles had joined the chase from a safe distance, pedaling hard to keep up with the action. Even Mr. Kowalski had emerged from his garage, wrench still in hand, to watch the unusual parade pass by his house. This was exactly what Sarah had hoped to avoid. In a small town like Millbrook, a police chase became instant entertainment, and entertainment had a way of becoming gossip, and gossip had a way of becoming truth, whether it was accurate or not. By tomorrow morning, there would be a dozen different versions of what had happened here, each one more dramatic than the last. Jack turned down Elm Street, clearly heading for the residential maze where the houses sat closer together and the yards offered more obstacles. It was a smart move, Sarah admitted to herself. Thunder's size and the need to avoid property damage would slow them down significantly once they entered the tighter spaces. But it was also a temporary solution at best. Jack was already showing signs of fatigue, his pace slowing and his movements becoming less coordinated. More importantly, Elm Street led directly to Memorial Park, and Memorial Park led to the town square. If Jack was heading where Sarah thought he was heading, this chase was about to become a very public spectacle indeed. Thunder snorted softly, as if sensing his rider's concern. Sarah reached forward to pat his neck, feeling the familiar comfort of his steady presence. Whatever was driving Jack Morrison to run, whatever documents he might be carrying, whatever secrets were about to be revealed, she and Thunder would see this through together. The question that nagged at her, though, was simple. In a town where everyone knew everyone, what could be worth running from? As they approached the park entrance, Sarah saw Jack glance back once more, his face pale with exhaustion and something else, fear. Not the fear of being caught, she realized, but the fear of what might happen once he stopped running. It was a look she'd seen before in her career, usually on the faces of people who'd stumbled into something much bigger than themselves. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. In any other circumstances, it would have been beautiful. Today, it felt like a countdown to something none of them were prepared for. Memorial Park had always been the heart of Millbrook, a place where families gathered for summer concerts, and children fed ducks in the small pond that reflected the gazebo's white-painted railings. Today, however, the peaceful gathering spot transformed into an arena as word of the chase spread through the community like wildfire. Jack stumbled slightly as he entered the park, his dress shoes slipping on the gravel path that wound between century-old oak trees. The manila envelope. Inside, his jacket had shifted during his flight, and he could feel its sharp corners digging into his side with each labored breath. His legs burned with the effort of maintaining his pace, but the sound of approaching hoofbeats drove him forward, even as his body begged for rest. Behind him, Thunder's steady rhythm never faltered. The stallion navigated the park's pathways with the confidence of familiarity, having patrolled these grounds countless times during community events. Sarah felt the horse's muscles tense slightly as they passed a group of joggers who had stopped to stare, but Thunder's training held firm. Years of exposure to crowds, unexpected noises, and stressful situations had molded him into the perfect police mount. "Easy, boy," Sarah murmured, more for her own comfort than the horse's. Thunder's ears flicked back momentarily at her voice before returning to their alert forward position. She could sense the stallion's eagerness to close the distance with their quarry, but she held him to a controlled pace. Whatever was driving Jack Morrison to run, she needed him conscious and coherent when this ended. The first drops of the documents escaped Jack's pocket as he vaulted over a low, decorative fence near the park's centerpiece fountain. The papers scattered in the evening breeze like autumn leaves, white against the green grass. Jack noticed immediately, spinning around with panic in his eyes, but his momentum carried him forward. He couldn't stop, not when Thunder was less than 50 yards behind him. Sarah saw the papers too, and her police training kicked in automatically. Evidence, her mind catalogued, though evidence of what remained unclear. She guided Thunder around the fountain's perimeter, noting where the documents had landed without breaking pursuit. Whatever those papers contained, they were important enough to make a respected community member risk everything by running. Margaret Fuller, who had been walking her ancient basset hound Buster through the park, stood frozen as the chase swept past her. She'd known Jack Morrison since he'd moved to Millbrook 8 years ago, had served with him on the library fundraising committee just last year. The man who'd always impressed her with his thoughtful questions and careful attention to detail now looked like a wild animal caught in a trap. "What in heaven's name?" she muttered, watching as several teenagers on bicycles skidded to a halt near the scattered papers. One of them, Tommy Rodriguez, hopped off his bike and reached for the closest document before his friend David grabbed his arm. "Dude, don't touch that," David hissed. "That's like evidence or something." But Tommy's curiosity proved stronger than his caution. He snatched up the paper and squinted at the official letterhead, his eyes widening as he read. "Holy cow, David. You're not gonna believe this." News traveled fast in Millbrook, but in the age of smartphones, it traveled at light speed. Within minutes of Tommy's discovery, photos of the documents were pinging across social media feeds throughout the town. The grainy images showed portions of financial statements, bank routing numbers, and what appeared to be correspondence between town officials and a construction company based 3 counties away. Rebecca Torres was in her cluttered office at the Millbrook Gazette when the first photo reached her. As the newspaper's editor and primary investigative reporter, she'd developed a network of sources that would have impressed journalists in much larger cities. Her phone buzzed with incoming messages, each one adding another piece to what was, rapidly becoming a puzzle that could reshape everything she thought she knew about her hometown. Definitely City Hall letterhead, she murmured to herself, zooming in on the image. The construction company mentioned in the correspondence was Hartwell and Associates, a name that made her stomach tighten with recognition. She'd been investigating irregularities in the town's recent infrastructure projects for months, following a paper trail that seemed to vanish whenever she got close to something significant. Now it seemed that trail had literally blown into the open. Mayor William Hartwell was in his spacious office on the third floor of City Hall when his phone began ringing incessantly. Through his window he could see the crowd gathering in, the town square below, people pointing and talking in animated clusters. His secretary, Mrs. Davidson, appeared in his doorway with an expression he'd never seen before, a mixture of confusion and barely concealed alarm. "Sir, you need to see this," she said, holding out her smartphone with a shaking hand. Hartwell took the phone and felt his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. The document in the photo was unmistakably real, bearing his signature and the official seal of the mayor's office. It authorized payments to Hartwell and Associates, his brother's construction company, for work on the new community center project. Work that had been inflated by nearly 40% above the actual costs. "Where did this come from?" he demanded, his voice carrying the authority that had served him well through 6 years as mayor. "Social media, sir. Apparently there are more documents and they're all related to—" "I know what they're related to," Hartwell snapped, then immediately regretted his tone. Mrs. Davidson had worked for 3 mayors before him, and her discretion was legendary. If anyone could help him navigate this crisis, it was her. Meanwhile, in the park, Jack had reached the far edge near the elementary school playground. His legs finally gave out, sending him to his knees beside the swing set where he'd pushed his daughter Emma just 2 months ago during the summer festival. The irony struck him even through his exhaustion. He was caught in the same place where he'd felt most hopeful about Millbrook's future. Thunder approached at a measured walk now, Sarah's gentle pressure on the reins communicating patience rather than aggression. The great stallion had done his job, maintaining pursuit without causing injury or panic, and now his training shifted to the next phase, de-escalation and control. "End of the line, Jack," Sarah called out, dismounting smoothly while keeping Thunder's reins in hand. Her voice carried professional authority, but also the warmth of someone who'd shared coffee with the man now slumped in defeat before her. Jack looked up at her with eyes that held more than just exhaustion. There was relief there, mixed with a fear that went deeper than concern for his own future. "Sarah, you don't understand. Those papers, they're going to destroy people." "Good. People who didn't know what they were getting involved in." Then help me understand," she replied, approaching slowly with her hands visible. "Talk to me, Jack. Help me figure out what's going on here." Behind them, the crowd from the park was beginning to migrate toward the playground, drawn by curiosity and the fundamental human need to witness history in the making. Thunder stood perfectly still, his dark coat gleaming in the late afternoon sun, a silent sentinel watching over a moment that would change Millbrook forever. Jack reached into his jacket and withdrew the manila envelope, now slightly rumpled from his flight. "It started with a simple budget discrepancy," he said, his breathing still labored. "Just some numbers that didn't add up in the quarterly report. I thought it was a clerical error, maybe a misplaced decimal point." He paused, looking at the envelope as if it contained explosives rather than paperwork. But the deeper I dug, the more wrong it got. "Sarah, we're talking about systematic fraud spanning 3 years, Money that was supposed to go to school improvements, road repairs, the new fire station, it all got diverted through shell companies and fake contracts. Sarah felt a chill despite the warm evening air. "How much money, Jack?" $2.7 million, he whispered. "And that's just what I could trace before they noticed I was looking." The magnitude of the number hit both of them like a physical blow. In a town of 8,000 people, where the entire annual budget barely exceeded $12 million, nearly $3 million in stolen funds represented a betrayal so profound it threatened the very foundation of community trust. Thunder shifted slightly, his ears swiveling toward the approaching crowd, and Sarah realized their private moment was about to become very public indeed. Whatever secrets Jack Morrison had uncovered, whatever corruption had been festering in the heart of Millbrook's government, it was about to be exposed under the scrutiny of the entire community. And somewhere in that approaching crowd, Sarah suspected, were people who had very good reasons to wish those secrets had stayed buried. The crowd that converged on the playground represented a cross-section of Millbrook's entire population. There was Mrs. Patterson, still clutching her cordless phone, walking beside Miguel Santos, the fire chief, whose expression grew darker with each step. Behind them came a cluster of teenagers, their phones held high to capture every moment, while elderly residents moved more slowly, but with equal determination to witness whatever was about to unfold. Sarah positioned herself between Jack and the approaching crowd, her hand resting lightly on Thunder's neck. The stallion seemed to sense the growing tension, his muscles taut beneath her touch, ready to respond if the situation escalated. Years of crowd control at town festivals had taught both horse and rider to read the mood of a gathering, and what Sarah read now made her increasingly uneasy. "Stay back, everyone," she called out, her voice carrying the authority of her badge. "This is police business." But the crowds. Momentum proved difficult to contain. Too many people had seen the scattered documents, too many smartphones had captured images of the financial records, and too many whispered conversations had already begun connecting dots that painted an ugly picture of municipal corruption. Rebecca Torres pushed through the gathering crowd, her reporter's instincts overriding social conventions. She'd known Jack Morrison professionally for years, had relied on his expertise for several stories about city budgets and municipal spending. If anyone could make sense of the financial documents now circulating on social media, it was the man, sitting exhausted beside the swing set. "Jack!" she called out, raising her voice to carry over the murmur of the crowd. "Rebecca Torres from the Gazette. Can you tell us what's in those documents?" Sarah shot her a warning look. "Not now, Rebecca. Let the man catch his breath." But Jack was already shaking his head, struggling to his feet with the manila envelope, clutched against his chest. "No, Sarah, they deserve to know. These people trusted their government, and that trust was betrayed." He looked out at the faces surrounding him. Neighbors, friends, people who'd voted in elections and paid their taxes with the faith that their money would be used honestly. His voice was hoarse, but clear when he spoke. The construction contract for the new community center was inflated by $400,000. The road repair project on Maple Street? The actual work cost 60% of what the city paid. The new fire truck that Fire Chief Santos has been waiting 2 years for. The money was there, but it got redirected through a company that exists only on paper. Miguel Santos stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Are you telling me that my department has been operating with outdated equipment while someone was stealing money allocated for our safety?" Jack nodded grimly. "I'm sorry, Miguel. The department was supposed to receive $800,000 in new equipment funding. According to these records, only $300,000 actually reached you. The rest disappeared into accounts controlled by Hartwell and Associates." A ripple of angry murmurs swept through the crowd at the mention of the name. Mayor Hartwell's construction company had been involved in nearly every major municipal project over the past 3 years, and suddenly those projects took on a more sinister cast. "That's impossible," declared Councilwoman Patricia Brennan, pushing her way to the front of the group. As the longest-serving member of the town council, she'd supported every one of the projects Jack was now calling into question. Every contract went through proper bidding procedures. Every expenditure was approved by the council. Jack pulled a sheet of paper from the envelope, his hands shaking slightly. "Mrs. Brennan, do you remember voting on Emergency Resolution 47B last October? The one that authorized additional funding for foundation work at the community center?" "Of course I do. There were unexpected soil conditions that required additional reinforcement. According to the geological survey I found in the files, the soil conditions were known about 6 months before construction began. But look at this." Jack held up the document, pointing to a series of signatures. "The emergency resolution was signed and dated 3 days before the unexpected conditions were discovered. Someone knew there would be cost overruns before they happened." The implications hit Councilwoman Brennan like a physical blow. She'd trusted the information provided to her, had voted in good faith based on reports she'd assumed were accurate. The realization that she might have been manipulated into approving fraudulent expenditures was almost too much to process. "You're saying we were all played?" asked Tom Mitchell, the owner of Mitchell's Hardware and a frequent attendee of town meetings. "That someone used the council as rubber stamps for their own enrichment?" Before Jack could answer, Deputy Marcus Thompson appeared at the edge of the crowd, his radio crackling with static. Sarah had been expecting backup, but Marcus's expression suggested he wasn't here to assist with crowd control. "Chen!" he called out, approaching with obvious reluctance. "Chief Martinez wants to see Morrison at the station, immediately." Sarah frowned. Standard procedure would be to take statements at the scene, especially with potential evidence scattered around the park. "What's the hurry, Marcus?" The deputy's eyes darted nervously between Sarah and the crowd. Orders came from above the chief, way above. The phrase sent a chill through the assembled residents. In a small town like Millbrook, there weren't many levels of authority above Police Chief Martinez. The implication was clear. Someone with significant political influence was trying to control the situation. "I'm not going anywhere until these people get answers," Jack declared, surprising everyone with his sudden defiance. "I've spent 3 months documenting these crimes, and I won't let them be buried by political pressure." Thunder snorted softly, as if expressing his own opinion about the proceedings. The stallion's dark eyes seemed to take in every face in the crowd, every gesture and expression, filing away details that might become important later. Sarah had learned to trust the horse's instincts about people, and right now, Thunder's tension suggested he sensed deception somewhere in the gathering. Rebecca Torres had been scribbling notes furiously throughout the exchange, her journalistic mind racing to connect the pieces of what was clearly a major story. But one detail nagged at her, a discrepancy between what Jack was describing and what she'd observed during her own investigation. "Jack," she said, raising her voice above the crowd's murmur, "you mentioned Hartwell and Associates received the inflated payments, but my sources suggest those funds were routed through multiple companies. Are we talking about a single entity or a network of shell corporations?" Jack's expression darkened further. "It's worse than I thought, Rebecca. Hartwell and Associates is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole network of fake companies, all with the same registered address, all controlled by the same people. They've been systematically draining municipal funds for years." "What people?" demanded Chief Santos. "Give us names." Jack hesitated, looking around at the faces surrounding him. Some of these people had been his friends, his neighbors, his colleagues. What he was about to reveal would shatter relationships and destroy reputations, but the truth couldn't stay buried any longer. The network includes Mayor Hartwell, obviously, but also City Attorney David Walsh, Procurement Director Jennifer Park, and, he paused, his voice catching, and my own supervisor, Finance Director Robert Chen. The last name hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Robert Chen was her cousin, the man who'd helped her get established in Millbrook when she'd first arrived. He'd been a mentor, a family connection in a town where such relationships mattered enormously. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Robert's one of the most honest people I know." Jack's eyes filled with genuine sorrow as he looked at her. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I wish I was wrong, but the evidence is overwhelming. Robert's signature is on dozens of authorization forms for payments to non-existent companies. Either he's complicit or someone has been forging his signature for 3 years." The crowd was growing restless, angry voices beginning to override the more measured tones of earlier discussion. People were taking sides, some demanding immediate arrests, while others insisted on due process. The unity of purpose that had brought them together was fracturing into factions, each with their own interpretation of events. Thunder seemed to sense the shifting mood, his ears flattening slightly against his head. Sarah could feel the horses growing unease through the reins, and she shared it completely. Crowds could turn unpredictable quickly, especially when they felt betrayed by their leaders. Deputy Thompson approached Sarah again, his radio squawking insistently. "Chen, I've got orders to bring Morrison in now. The mayor is on his way down here himself, and things are about to get complicated." Indeed, through the crowd, Sarah could see a familiar figure striding across the park with purposeful steps. Mayor William Hartwell was approaching, flanked by 2 men in dark suits who definitely weren't from Millbrook. Their appearance raised immediate questions about who else might be involved in whatever conspiracy Jack had uncovered. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just Jack Morrison's fate, but the future of an entire community's. Faith in its leadership. Thunder stood ready, Sarah held her ground, and the crowd waited to see which side of justice would prevail when the powerful came face to face with the truth. Mayor William Hartwell's approach changed the entire atmosphere of the gathering. At 58, he possessed the kind of commanding presence that had served him well through 6 years in office and decades in local business. His silver hair was perfectly styled despite the evening's chaos, and his tailored suit projected an image of competence and authority that had won him 3 consecutive elections. But today, something was different. The 2 men flanking him moved with the precise efficiency of security professionals, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd for potential threats. Their presence transformed what had been a community discussion into something that felt more like a standoff. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hartwell called out as he approached, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a career politician. "I understand there's been some confusion this evening. I'm here to help clear things up." Jack Morrison struggled to his feet, the manila envelope still clutched in his hands. Seeing his accuser approach seemed to give him a second wind, his exhaustion temporarily overcome by righteous anger. "Confusion? Is that what you call systematic theft from the taxpayers who trusted you?" The mayor's smile never wavered, but Sarah noticed how his eyes hardened. "Mr. Morrison, you're clearly upset about something. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, away from..." He gestured at the crowd with barely concealed contempt, "away from speculation and rumor." "These aren't rumors," Jack shot back, raising the envelope. "These are your financial records, your signatures, your brother's company receiving payments for work that was never done." Thunder shifted restlessly beneath Sarah's hand, his instincts clearly troubled by the tension crackling between the 2 men. The stallion's ears swiveled constantly, monitoring the crowd's mood while keeping the mayor and his companions in his peripheral vision. Years of police work had taught Thunder to recognize when situations were about to escalate beyond words. Rebecca Torres stepped forward, her notebook ready. Mayor Hartwell, can you respond to the allegations about inflated contracts and shell companies connected to your administration? One of the men in suits moved to block her approach, but Hartwell raised a hand to stop him. Miss Torres, I think you know better than to report unsubstantiated accusations as fact. Mr. Morrison is clearly under stress, and stressed people sometimes see patterns that don't exist. The patterns exist, insisted Councilwoman Brennan, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and betrayal. I've been looking at the documents on social media. The dates, the signatures, the payment authorizations, they all point to systematic manipulation of the bidding process. Hartwell's mask of political charm began to slip. Patricia, you're talking about matters you don't fully understand. Municipal finance is complex, and sometimes emergency situations require flexible solutions. Flexible solutions? Fire Chief Santos pushed to the front of the crowd, his face red with indignation. My department has been waiting 2 years for equipment that should have been purchased with money that apparently went into your family's pockets. How's that for flexibility? The crowd's murmur grew louder, more hostile. Sarah could feel the situation spiraling toward something dangerous, and Thunder's increasing tension confirmed her assessment. She'd seen riots start with less provocation than what was building in front of the elementary school playground. Everyone needs to calm down, she announced, raising her voice above the growing din. This is a legal matter that needs to be handled through proper channels. Proper channels? Jack laughed bitterly. Sarah, the proper channels are corrupted. The people who are supposed to oversee municipal spending are the same people who've been stealing from it. Deputy Thompson approached Sarah again, his radio crackling with increasingly urgent messages. Chief Martinez is demanding that Morrison be brought in immediately. He says there's been a complaint filed against him for theft of municipal documents. Sarah stared at the deputy in disbelief. Theft? He's the municipal auditor. Reviewing financial records is literally his job. Not anymore, announced one of the men in suits, producing a legal document from his jacket. Mr. Morrison was terminated from his position this afternoon for insubordination and unauthorized access to confidential files. The revelation hit Jack like a physical blow. He'd suspected they might try to discredit him, but he hadn't expected them to move so quickly. You can't fire me for doing my job honestly. Your job, Hartwell replied smoothly, was to file routine audits, not to conduct unauthorized investigations into lawful municipal business. Your paranoid delusions have caused enough disruption for one day. Rebecca Torres had been documenting everything, but now she looked up from her notebook with suspicion. Mayor Hartwell, if the business was lawful, why did Mr. Morrison's investigation uncover discrepancies? And who exactly are these gentlemen? She gestured at the 2 suits flanking the mayor. These are representatives from the state attorney general's office, Hartwell replied without missing a beat. They're here to investigate allegations of municipal document theft. The lie was smoothly delivered, but Sarah noticed how Thunder's ears pinned back at the sound of the mayor's voice. Horses were remarkably good at detecting deception. And Thunder's reaction suggested there was more fiction than truth in Hartwell's explanation. Jack saw through the deception as well. If they're from the Attorney General's office, they should be interested in the evidence of corruption, not trying to suppress it. He raised the envelope again. Everything you need to know is right here. Bank records, forged authorizations, payment schedules that don't match actual work completed. Hand over those documents. demanded one of the suits, stepping forward with obvious menace. "Those are stolen municipal property." "Like hell they are," Jack replied, backing toward Thunder and Sarah. The stallion's imposing presence seemed to offer some protection against the increasingly hostile situation. Sarah found herself faced with an impossible choice. Her training and her badge demanded that she follow orders, but every instinct she possessed screamed that those orders were wrong. The evidence Jack had presented seemed credible, the mayor's explanations felt hollow, and the mysterious men, claiming to be state investigators, had never shown proper identification. Thunder made the decision for both of them. As one of the suits reached for Jack's envelope, the stallion stepped forward, positioning his massive bulk between the man and his target. The horse's message was clear. No one was taking anything from anyone while he was on duty. The crowd, which had been growing more agitated with each exchange, suddenly found a focal point for their anger. The sight of outsiders trying to suppress evidence of local corruption struck at the heart of small-town values, and voices began rising in Jack's defense. "Let him talk," shouted Tom Mitchell. "We have a right to know where our tax money went." "Those documents belong to the taxpayers," added Mrs. Patterson, brandishing her phone like a weapon. "We paid for whatever's in them." Councilwoman Brennan stepped beside Jack, her political instincts finally overriding her shock. "As a duly elected representative of this community, I demand to see the evidence before it's confiscated." Mayor Hartwell's composure cracked completely. "Patricia, you're out of your depth here. This is a matter of municipal security that requires municipal security." Fire Chief Santos had pushed his way to the front again, and his expression was thunderous. "The only security issue I see is the security of our public funds, which apparently haven't been secure at all." The tension reached a breaking point when one of the suits made a grab for the envelope in Jack's hands. Thunder responded instantly, rearing slightly and striking the ground with his front hooves, a warning that echoed off the surrounding buildings like gunshots. The crowd instinctively stepped back, but their mood shifted from agitated to openly hostile. Sarah realized that she was witnessing the moment when a community's faith in its leaders shattered completely. The people of Millbrook had gathered expecting explanations and reassurances. Instead, they were watching their mayor try to suppress evidence while mysterious strangers claimed authority they couldn't prove they possessed. "That's enough," Sarah declared, her voice cutting through the chaos with practiced authority. "Nobody is confiscating anything until proper warrants are presented and proper procedures are followed." Deputy Thompson looked stricken. "Chen, you're going against direct orders." "I'm upholding the law," she replied firmly. "And the law says evidence of potential crimes doesn't get buried to protect the politically powerful." Thunder stood like a living monument to justice beside her, his dark coat gleaming in the evening light, his presence lending weight to her words. The stallion had become more than just a police horse. He'd become a symbol of integrity in a situation where integrity was in short supply. Mayor Hartwell realized he was losing control of the narrative, and his next words revealed the desperation of a man watching his carefully constructed empire crumble. "Officer Chen, you're making a serious mistake. There are forces at work here that you don't understand, consequences that go far beyond this little town." The threat was barely veiled, but it had the opposite effect from what Hartwell intended. Instead of intimidating Sarah, it confirmed her suspicions that the conspiracy Jack had uncovered reached far beyond simple municipal corruption. As the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the playground, where everything was being decided, the crowd pressed closer, their demand for truth becoming impossible to ignore. Thunder stood ready, Sarah held her ground, and Jack Morrison prepared to reveal the full scope of the corruption that had infected the heart of their community. The standoff in the playground reached its crescendo when Jack Morrison made a decision that would change everything. Instead of clutching the manila envelope protectively, he opened it and began pulling out documents, holding them high for everyone to see. "You want to know the truth about municipal security?" he called out, his voice carrying across the crowd with newfound strength. "Here's your security. Bank transfers totaling $2.7 million, all authorized by people you trusted, all disappearing into accounts that don't legally exist." He held up a spreadsheet covered in red ink corrections. "This is the real budget for the community center. The actual construction cost was $1.2 million. The city paid $2 million. The difference went to companies owned by the mayor's brother, staffed by employees who receive paychecks but never show up to work." Thunder stood motionless beside Sarah, but she could feel the stallion's coiled energy, ready to respond to whatever came next. The horse's instincts had been proven right too many times for her to doubt them now, and Thunder's alertness suggested the situation was about to escalate dramatically. Mayor Hartwell's facade finally crumbled completely. "Morrison, you're playing with forces beyond your comprehension. This goes much higher than municipal government, and people with real power don't appreciate being threatened by small-town accountants with delusions of heroism." The threat was explicit now, and the crowd responded with immediate hostility. Voices rose in anger, people pressed forward, and Sarah realized she was witnessing the birth of a genuine uprising against corruption that had been festering for years. "What forces?" demanded Councilwoman Brennan, her political instincts finally fully engaged. "Who exactly are you working with, William?" Before Hartwell could answer, Rebecca Torres made a connection that sent chills through everyone present. "The registered address for all those shell companies, I remember now. It's the same address listed for the state consultant group that's been advising municipalities throughout the region on budget optimization." Jack's eyes widened as he shuffled through his papers. "Regional Fiscal Solutions. They've been consulting with 17 different towns over the past 4 years, all implementing similar budget reforms." He looked up at the crowd with horror in his eyes. This isn't just about Millbrook. This is a coordinated effort to loot municipal budgets across the entire state. The magnitude of the conspiracy hit the assembled residents like a physical blow. What they'd assumed was local corruption was actually part of a systematic scheme that stretched far beyond their small community. The implications were staggering. If 17 towns were being similarly robbed, the total theft could exceed $50 million. Fire Chief Santos stepped forward, his face pale with realization. That would explain why every town in the region has been struggling with budget shortfalls. We all thought it was just economic pressure, but if someone's been systematically stealing from municipal budgets, it would bankrupt essential services, finished Mrs. Patterson, her voice barely above a whisper. Schools, fire departments, police, infrastructure maintenance. Everything would be underfunded while the money disappeared into private pockets. One of the men in suits had been speaking quietly into his phone throughout the revelations, and now he stepped forward with obvious urgency. "Mayor Hartwell, we need to leave, now." But Thunder had other ideas. The stallion moved with surprising speed for such a large animal, positioning himself to block the path toward the street. His message was unmistakable. No one was leaving until this was resolved properly. Sarah made her choice in that moment, a decision that would define not just her career, but her character. "William Hartwell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and theft of public funds." The words hung in the evening air like a challenge to the natural order. A small-town police officer was arresting the mayor, supported by nothing more than a horse and the angry voices of citizens who'd been betrayed by their leaders. Deputy Thompson looked stricken. "Chen, you can't arrest the mayor without authorization from the chief." "I can arrest anyone who commits crimes in my presence," Sarah replied firmly, "and conspiracy to suppress evidence is definitely a crime." Jack held up another document, his hands trembling with either exhaustion or adrenaline. "There's more. Robert Chen. Sarah, I'm sorry, but your cousin isn't just complicit. He's the architect of the entire system." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Robert had been family, the person who'd welcomed her to Millbrook and helped her establish her life in the community. The thought that he'd been orchestrating the theft of public funds while pretending to be a dedicated public servant was almost too much to process. "That's impossible," she whispered. Jack's expression was filled with genuine sorrow as he handed her a document bearing Robert's signature. He designed the shell company network, set up the fake contracts, and managed the money transfers. Without his expertise in municipal finance, none of this would have been possible. Thunder sensed Sarah's emotional turmoil and moved closer, his warm presence offering comfort in the midst of devastating betrayal. The stallion's steadiness reminded her that regardless of personal relationships, her duty was to the law and to the community she'd sworn to protect. The crowd was growing more agitated, with voices calling for immediate justice and others demanding that the full truth be revealed before anyone was condemned. The unity that had brought them together was fracturing as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. That's when Thunder proved why he was more than just a police horse. He was a guardian of justice itself. As one of the suits made a desperate lunge for Jack's remaining documents, Thunder reared up, his powerful hooves striking the air inches from the man's face. The message was unmistakable. No one would be silencing the truth while Thunder was on duty. But more than that, the stallion's action galvanized the crowd, reminding them that even in the face of overwhelming corruption, there were still symbols of integrity worth fighting for. "The horse is right," called out Tom Mitchell, his voice carrying newfound determination. "We're not letting anyone destroy evidence or cover up crimes. This is our town, our money, our future they've been stealing." Margaret Fuller stepped forward, her elderly frame somehow projecting immense dignity. "I've lived in Millbrook for 73 years. I've seen good leaders and bad leaders, honest mistakes and deliberate deceptions. What we're witnessing tonight isn't politics, it's theft, pure and simple." The crowd rallied around her words, their anger transforming into focused determination. People began forming a protective circle around Jack and his documents, human shields against any attempt to suppress the evidence they desperately needed to see. Mayor Hartwell realized his situation had become untenable. The mysterious men flanking him were backing toward their vehicle, clearly preparing to abandon him to face the consequences alone. His political career was over, his reputation destroyed, and his freedom hanging by a thread. "You people don't understand," he said, desperately. "This was about bringing investment to the region, creating opportunities for economic growth. Sometimes you have to work outside traditional channels to make progress." "Progress?" Councilwoman Brennan's voice dripped with contempt. "You call stealing money from schools and fire departments progress? You call bankrupting essential services economic development?" Jack pulled out the final document, the one he'd been saving for last. "This is a memo from Robert Chen to Mayor Hartwell, dated 6 months ago. It outlines their plans to expand the operation to 23 additional municipalities over the next 2 years. They were planning to steal over $100 million from taxpayers across the state." The number was so large it seemed abstract, but Fire Chief Santos brought it into sharp focus. "That's enough money to fully fund fire protection for every small town in the state for 3 years. Instead, it was going to disappear into private bank accounts while our communities struggled to maintain basic services. Thunder stood like a monument to integrity in the center of the chaos, his dark coat gleaming in the fading light, his presence lending weight to every word of truth that was spoken. The stallion had become the symbol of everything the conspiracy had tried to destroy: honesty, service, and unwavering commitment to protecting the community. Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her, angry, betrayed, but ultimately hopeful that justice might still be possible. The documents in Jack's hands represented more than just evidence of crimes. They represented the chance for a community to reclaim its integrity and rebuild the trust that had been so systematically violated. As the confrontation reached its peak, with Thunder standing guard over the truth and the community united in their demand for justice, Sarah realized that this moment would be remembered not as the day Millbrook's government fell apart, but as the day its citizens fought back against corruption and won. The stallion beside her snorted softly, as if agreeing with her assessment, ready for whatever challenges the final chapter of this extraordinary day might bring. 3 months later, Millbrook was a transformed town. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the renovated City Hall as Sarah Chen adjusted Thunder's tack in preparation for their patrol. The stallion's coat gleamed with health and pride, and his ears perked forward eagerly at the sound of children's laughter from the nearby elementary school. The playground where their confrontation with corruption had reached its climax was once again filled with the innocent joy of childhood, a symbol of the community's renewal. The aftermath of that dramatic evening had unfolded with the precision of a well-orchestrated symphony. Within hours of Jack Morrison's revelations, state investigators, real ones this time, had arrived in Millbrook to begin unraveling the conspiracy that stretched across 17 municipalities. The mysterious men who'd claimed to represent the Attorney General's office had been arrested at their motel, identified as private security contractors hired to intimidate potential whistleblowers. Mayor William Hartwell now resided in the state penitentiary, serving a 15-year sentence for fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. His brother's construction company had been dissolved, its assets liquidated to help repay the stolen funds. The network of shell corporations that had drained municipal budgets across the region had been dismantled piece by piece, with investigators recovering nearly $40 million in stolen taxpayer money. Robert Chen's betrayal had been the hardest pill for Sarah to swallow, but justice had been served there as well. Her cousin, the architect of the entire scheme, had received a 12-year sentence and was cooperating fully with federal investigators tracking similar corruption schemes in other states. His expertise in municipal finance, once used to rob communities, was now helping recover stolen funds and prevent future fraud. Jack Morrison had been vindicated completely, reinstated to his position as municipal auditor, and offered a promotion to head of the newly created Office of Municipal Integrity. The manila envelope that had started everything now sat in a place of honor in his office, a reminder that one person's courage to speak the truth could change an entire community's destiny. The town had held a special election to replace Mayor Hartwell, and Councilwoman Patricia Brennan had been elected by the largest margin in Millbrook's history. Her first act had been to implement comprehensive transparency measures, ensuring that every municipal expenditure would be subject to public scrutiny. The new community center had been completed using the recovered funds, and it stood as a testament to what honest government could accomplish. Fire Chief Miguel Santos had finally received his new equipment, funded by money that had been stolen and recovered. The fire department's response times had improved dramatically, and the community felt safer knowing their emergency services were properly funded. The irony that their equipment had been purchased with their own stolen tax money wasn't lost on anyone, but it served as a powerful reminder of the importance of vigilant oversight. Rebecca Torres had won a state journalism award for her coverage of the Millbrook corruption scandal, and her series of articles had sparked investigations in dozens of other municipalities. The Millbrook Gazette had grown from a small weekly paper to a regional publication respected for its commitment to investigative reporting and government accountability. But perhaps the most significant change was in the community itself. The residents of Millbrook had learned that democracy required active participation, that trust must be earned and continuously validated, and that ordinary citizens had the power to demand extraordinary accountability from their leaders. Thunder had become something of a local celebrity, his role in preventing the suppression of evidence earning him recognition as the first police horse to receive the state's Medal of Valor. The ceremony had been held in the town square, with hundreds of residents gathering to celebrate not just Thunder's courage, but the principles of justice and integrity he represented. Today's patrol took Sarah and Thunder through the neighborhoods they'd raced through 3 months earlier, but the atmosphere was completely different. Children waved from their yards, elderly residents paused their gardening to offer friendly greetings, and there was a palpable sense of community pride that hadn't existed before the scandal broke. As they passed the memorial park where documents had first scattered in the wind, Sarah noticed a new addition, a bronze plaque commemorating the evening when Millbrook citizens had chosen truth over convenience, justice over comfort. The inscription read, "In memory of democracy defended by ordinary people who refused to accept corruption as normal." Thunder paused beside the plaque, as if reading the words himself, then snorted softly with what Sarah chose to interpret as approval. The stallion had always possessed an almost supernatural ability to understand the significance of moments, and his behavior suggested he knew their work that evening had been about more than just catching a fleeing suspect. The sound of approaching hoofbeats announced the arrival of Thunder's newest colleague, Lightning, a young mare who joined the mounted patrol program thanks to expanded funding approved by the town council. The program had become so popular that neighboring communities were requesting assistance in establishing their own mounted units, with Thunder often serving as a training example for younger horses. Officer Jennifer Walsh rode Lightning with the same confidence Sarah had developed with Thunder, though she was still learning to read the subtle communications that made the partnership between horse and rider so effective. Sarah had volunteered to train the new mounted officers, sharing not just techniques, but the philosophy that made police horses like Thunder so valuable to community policing. "Any exciting calls today?" Jennifer asked as she brought Lightning alongside Thunder. Sarah smiled, remembering a time when exciting calls had meant chasing corruption and confronting political conspiracies. "Actually, yes. We're heading to the elementary school for their career day presentation. Thunder's going to demonstrate police horse training for the 3rd grade classes." The transformation from dramatic confrontations to routine community engagement symbolized everything that had changed in Millbrook. The trust between police and citizens had been rebuilt on a foundation of transparency and mutual respect, with Thunder serving as a bridge between authority and community. As they approached the school, Sarah reflected on the lessons learned during those chaotic months of investigation and recovery. The most important lesson was that corruption thrived in darkness, but withered under the bright light of public scrutiny. The people of Millbrook had learned to demand answers, to question expenditures, and to hold their leaders accountable, not just during elections, but every day. Thunder seemed to sense her reflective mood, turning his head slightly to catch her eye with one of his own. The stallion's intelligence had always amazed Sarah, but she'd learned to trust his instincts completely. During the corruption investigation, Thunder had consistently identified deception before Sarah's human senses could detect it. The horses' reaction to Mayor Hartwell and his mysterious associates had provided crucial early warnings about the true nature of the conspiracy. The elementary school visit went perfectly, with Thunder patiently allowing dozens of small hands to pat his neck while Sarah explained the importance of police work in protecting communities. One little girl asked if Thunder was the same horse who'd helped catch the bad men who stole money from the town, and Sarah confirmed that he was indeed a hero. But heroes aren't just horses or police officers, Sarah told the assembled children. Heroes are people who stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Jack Morrison was a hero because he chose to tell the truth about corruption. Your parents and neighbors were heroes because they demanded justice instead of accepting lies. Thunder stood perfectly still during the presentation, but his ears moved constantly, monitoring every sound and movement around the children. Even in this peaceful setting, the stallion remained alert and ready to protect those in his care. It was that combination of gentleness and strength that made Thunder such an effective police horse and such a powerful symbol of justice. As their shift ended and they returned to the station, Sarah noticed a familiar figure waiting in the parking lot. Jack Morrison approached with a smile, carrying a bag of carrots that had become his traditional offering whenever he visited Thunder. "How's our four-legged hero today?" Jack asked, offering Thunder a carrot while scratching behind his ears in the exact spot the stallion preferred. "Still keeping the peace," Sarah replied, dismounting and beginning the process of removing Thunder's tack. "Still making sure justice gets served, one patrol at a time." Jack's recovery from the trauma of discovering and exposing the corruption had been remarkable. The vindication of his actions had restored his confidence, and his new role as head of municipal integrity had given him the resources to prevent future fraud. But more importantly, the community's support had shown him that doing the right thing, even when it was difficult, was always worth the risk. "I wanted to thank you both again," Jack said, his voice carrying genuine emotion. "That evening in the playground, when it felt like the whole world was against me, Thunder and you stood between me and people who would have buried the truth forever." Sarah finished storing Thunder's equipment and turned to face Jack directly. "We were just doing our job, protecting and serving the community. The real heroes were the citizens who demanded accountability and refused to let corruption continue." Thunder nickered softly, as if offering his own opinion on heroism, then wandered toward his stall where fresh hay and water awaited. Even police horses needed their rest after a day of keeping the peace. As Sarah watched Thunder settle into his evening routine, she marveled at how much had changed since that desperate chase 3 months ago. Millbrook had transformed from a community living with hidden corruption to a model of transparent government and engaged citizenship. The story had inspired similar reforms in communities across the state, proving that ordinary people really could make extraordinary changes when they refused to accept injustice as normal. The evening light filtering through the stable windows caught Thunder's coat, highlighting the strength and dignity that made him such a perfect symbol of justice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve the community, and new chances to ensure that the hard-won trust between citizens and their government continued to flourish. But tonight, Sarah was content to know that in Millbrook, at least justice had prevailed, corruption had been defeated, and a black stallion named Thunder had helped prove that even in the darkest times, truth and integrity could still triumph over deception and greed. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Jack Morrison, Sarah Chen, and Thunder has moved you as much as it moved us to tell it. This tale of courage standing against corruption, of ordinary people refusing to accept injustice, reminds us that democracy depends not on perfect leaders, but on engaged citizens willing to demand accountability. Just as thunder stood guard over truth in that playground confrontation, we all have opportunities to protect integrity in our own communities. If this story inspired you to believe that one person's courage can change everything, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Share your own stories of standing up for what's right, or tell us about heroes in your community who deserve recognition. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the triumph of justice over corruption, and hit that like button if Thunder's courage resonated with you. Together, we can ensure that stories like Millbrook's continue to inspire people everywhere to choose truth over convenience, integrity over silence. Thank you for joining us on this journey. And remember, sometimes the most powerful force for justice comes on 4 hooves and a brave heart.